Hello and welcome back to 2025. I haven't gone anywhere, so 2025 is still here. And today we're in present time. We're not in the past, we're not in the future, we're not time travelers. Unless you're watching this in the year 2030, then we really are in the past. But what are you doing watching this? It'd be old. I'll be dead. Well, who knows? No one knows what's going to happen. But I probably won't be dead. But today we're back with more glorious interviews. Yes, more glorious. So, as today's date, the 8th of January, that means that very soon, the 18th of January, will be a very special video over on the Tom Mason YouTube channel to celebrate 10 years of being on YouTube. I know, time flies. At the age, a lot younger than I did then. But I can spell the word introduction correctly this time rather than putting an X where a D should be, I assume. I'm not properly looked since. It's been a very long 10 years. I don't rather with introduction that often. But today, we shall crack on. My guest today is best known as a QI elf, with QI currently airing QI XL, QI normally, the normal shorter QI that isn't as good as XL because XL's longer, is on later in the week. But QI XL is currently on Tuesday at 9 p.m. E.g., it was on last night and it was amazing. It's the one and only James Harkin.
Hello, Tom Mason. Dobar dan to you. You said I should say hello in a different way, and that's Montenegrin for hello.
Ooh. So we'll start at the very beginning. How did you become a QI elf?
Well, we all have different ways of becoming QI elves, and usually it's through meeting John Lloyd somehow or other. But I came in a slightly different way. Sorry, John Lloyd, who's the creator of QI and lots of other things like Not the 9 O'Clock News and Blackadder and all that stuff. But I was an accountant in Manchester in Eccles, and I worked in a porter cabin, and it was okay, it paid my mortgage and stuff like that, but it was something that I didn't find that interesting because when you're an accountant, it's the same every single month.
Yeah,
Like you come in on the first and then you sort out all your accounts. Then at the end of the month, you do month end. And then the next month, you start again. And you do that again and again and again until year end when everything goes crazy.
yeah.
And then year end finishes and you do month end again. And it just goes on and on and on. And the job that I had was, I found it quite easy. And I was doing all my work quite quickly for each month. And I asked my boss if I could do anything different, using up my spare time. And they said, oh, well, we don't have anything for you right now. Just make yourself busy. And I had a computer that no one could see the screen, which was very useful. So it meant I could do whatever I wanted on the internet while I was supposed to be working. And my uncle told me that this new show QI had just started, and he knew that I was into quizzes. I was in the quiz team with Jenny Ryan from The Chase at the time. I was doing quizzes in Bolton, and he knew I was into quizzing, and he thought I might like it. And so he said, "Okay, well, why don't you go on the website?" So I went on the website, and they had competitions every week, and I won all the competitions. It was like they were trivia, so it wasn't so hard. There weren't that many people doing that kind of thing on the internet in those days. And they said, well, why don't you send us some ideas for questions? And I did that for a year. And then my boss brought me into the office, or rather, the head of IT did, and said, James, we've noticed a lot of unusual traffic on your internet. In fact, you're using up the second most internet in the entire company, and the first is our entire email system, and you're kind of catching up to it. And so they said, you're going to have to stop doing that. I basically blagged it and said, oh, look, there's cricket on at the moment and I'm streaming cricket. But that wasn't true. What I was actually doing was researching QI 24/7 almost, or 9 to 5 when I wasn't doing my work. And so I said to QI, I said, look, I'm going to have to stop this now. It's been fun, but I've got a job. I got a mortgage to pay. I'm going to have to stop doing QI stuff. And they said, well, why don't you jack in your job and come and work for us? And I obviously said no because I can't go and work in TV because I'm not rich and I have a mortgage to pay. And QI is a thing where, or TV rather, is a thing where it's very seasonal. So, if you might get work for 3 or 4 months of the year, but then for the rest of the year, you're not going to have any work. So I said I couldn't do it. And they said, well, what if you do the TV show? And then when we're not doing the TV show, you do our accounts. And so that's what I did for a couple of years. I did the TV show for 3 or 4 months of a year, and for the rest of the year, I did QI's accounts. And then eventually, we got lots of other types of work in, like the books and the podcast and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't need to do the accounts anymore.
Yeah,
And thankfully, I've never done any accounts since, apart from my annual ones for HMRC.
yeah. And with QI being this popular juggernaut and being that we're on the Latin thing, is there a is there a plan how to make the show still last, or will the show definitely end when we get to the end of Alphabet, or is there an alternative idea to make it last longer?
Well, two things there. First of all, it's not our decision if it lasts longer. In fact, even if it lasts 1 year longer, it's up to the BBC whether they want to keep it or cancel it or whatever. Um, but assuming they want to keep it, and I hope they do because it's very popular and it does very well, especially in some demographics that other BBC shows don't hit. Assuming they want it, we have plans certainly for the next 3 years. I've already got a proof of concept for the X series, which we're all slightly worried about because it's such a tough letter.
Yeah,
But I've kind of written out the outlines of all the shows that would be for X to show that that definitely can happen. And then Y and Z. And then after that, well, to be honest, we're not 100% certain what we would do. We have options. So if they wanted to carry on with us, we could do numbers. We can go back to A again, or we can think of something new to fill that gap. Because I think once, if QI ever does finish, which, well, it will finish, as we all know at some stage, but there is a real gap for sort of intelligent comedy and that sort of Reithian thing of trying to educate people, entertain them, trying to get people to learn things with facts. I think there is definitely going to be a gap there if QI finishes, and I think it would be really important for us if we could fill that gap rather than other people coming along, because I think what we do at QI is quite different to what a lot of other people do in television.
because I think that with QI, there's not many programs where 1 minute you can learn a really interesting fact, and next minute you can have Alan Davis say something stupid. There's not many TV shows on in well, there's probably in Sweden and whatnot because there's obviously there's been international versions of QI. But do you reckon that QI has become successful because of the people on it, or do you reckon that it's become successful because of the format?
Well, it's obviously helped by the people on it. I would say Stephen and Alan and Sandy definitely are integral to the popularity of QI and the fact that it's gone on so long. Those three people, without them, it would be very tough to have as good a show. The other people on it probably, I mean, they're all brilliant, but they're all on other shows as well, right? So they're not unique to us. But what definitely is unique to us is the sort of ethos of QI and the fact that the amount of how seriously we take the whole thing, ridiculously seriously, considering it's a comedy show at its heart. We have a full team, an enormous team of people who are doing the work all the time, and the amount of work, the amount of facts you see on the show is just really the froth on top of, you know, gallons and gallons of toxic waste of stuff that we found out that year. So yeah, I think one thing that is definitely integral to our success is the amount of work that we put in and the ethos behind QI.
Yeah. And do you reckon that the show has become popular because of the fact that people can then use these facts in everyday life to try and wow their friends, or just because they just think it's really interesting and they want to tell everyone? Do you reckon that that's why the audience have stayed so loyal to it and they've lasted all these years?
I think that's nice to think in theory. I mean, you watched it yesterday, right? You watched the show last night. What was the theme? Can you remember?
I think it was vintage. If I remember right, it was
Vintage.
vintage because they had the Danish ambassador who was in the audience.
That's right. Now, like, if you think about the facts that were on that show, like you might kind of remember most of them or maybe half of them, but you probably don't remember the absolute details of what year this happened or what the name of the Danish ambassador was and stuff like that. And after it's been on for a year and it's a year ago, the idea that you'll remember everything that's happened in the show, I think is pretty unlikely,
Yeah,
even if you have the greatest memory of all. So I think people like the idea of watching QI and then going and telling their mates in the pub.
yeah,
But I think what actually happens is they watch QI, they go to the pub, and then they half remember what they saw,
yeah.
and they kind of half tell a fact, and then they have to watch it again 5 times on Dave to actually confirm it.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes QI. So I think that's what makes QIs really because you can watch it once, and then a year later when it repeats on Dave, you can rewatch it again. But I think that's what makes having panel show on the BBC work really well because Mark the Week used to take the Mickey out of Dave, and then you would watch it on Dave, going and then because then you get the payoff in the end because you're watching it on Hello to Dave viewers. So I think that having QI on Dave helps to make people watch it more, and they watch it again, and you get the repeats. And I think that just means that it shows how much it's loved because people want to watch it again. They don't care that they might have seen it when it first came out, but they like watching it again. And the iPlayer adding nearly every episode is also another bonus to help it live longer. And do you reckon that it'll help the franchise even after the show's end? Do you reckon it'll help the franchise because of people love it so much they'll stick with the franchise enough for whatever happens next?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's kind of two different ways you can look at things like that. It's like you can either decide, well, my thing is so special, I'm going to make it very difficult for people to find, and when it comes out, that's the only time you can watch it, and we don't want it copied on YouTube, or we don't want it on iPlayer all the time. If you're who's the guy who's just pulled out of Glastonbury? Neil Young, is it? Who's like he just want if it is him or whoever it is, they just want their show to be special for the people who turn up, and they don't want it to be just repeated all the time on all over the world. And I think that's kind of one legitimate way of going about it. And then the other way of going about it is saying, well, I want my stuff everywhere.
Yeah,
So we might get onto the podcast later that we do. And the podcast, we deliberately have kept it always away from paywalls or anything like that. We just want as many people as possible to listen to this podcast, because we think that the more people who are listening, that will help us down
yeah,
the line because that will give us more fans and they will want anything else that we produce. And I think with QI, that's really helped us. Like with Dave, with us being ubiquitous in Dave, that means that
yeah,
we're always in the days when you had free view only and you had your first 4 or 5 channels in the UK, and then really apart from that you might watch UK Gold occasionally, and you would occasionally watch Dave. Like people would put us on every single night to go to sleep, and it doesn't matter if they'd seen it or not, they would just before they went to bed they put QI on. And I think that, and also we got put on YouTube by some naughty YouTubers who would rip us off the TV and put us on YouTube, and everyone got very upset about it and worried about it. But I think it meant that people in America could watch QI and people in Australia could watch QI. And then when we created other things like the podcast, people in America knew who we were. And so I think there is an argument for saying that with any kind of media, getting it out there as much as
yeah.
possible can only be helpful. And obviously, you don't want to do everything for free because you need to make money eventually. But I think that does work.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting that people because Dave's on 24/7, and I think that helps. And one of my favorite Dave facts that some I couldn't find it, so I don't know how accurate the person was, but they were on Only Connect telling because there was a question about the different names of what Dave was,
Mm,
which was out of date by that point because Dave's now you and Dave. And when
yeah.
that episode aired like just before Christmas, and it was filmed months ago, it was out of date because they missed off you and Dave. But she mentioned that when Dave closes, because she was up at the time the Dave ends, there was a bloke on it called Dave, and you watch Dave in doing I can't remember what he was doing, but he does something. So the general actual man called Dave does something to close the channel off. And I could never find it. I tried to record. I recorded a shopping channel at 2 a.m. to work out where this Dave was, and I couldn't find him. And I tried
I was once told that someone I know called Dave is who they named the channel after. But I think it's not named after any individual, but I do believe there's quite a lot of people in the TV industry who at least think that the channel is named after them.
yeah. Yeah, and every so often, the social media people would pretend they were the
Yeah.
and the favorite food hash browns, and then and then it's like that the sketch out of the fashion where he sees black and then he starts stacking it. They end up just saying hash brown and then having a meltdown over hash browns. It's really odd. And one of the other things you do, as we briefly mentioned, is how did the podcast No Such Thing as a Fish come about?
Well, that the origin story of that is basically that we were doing QI and we had loads of material that wasn't being used on QI and we were looking for an outlet for it. And me and Dan Schreiber were in the QI offices and we were chatting one day. And I said, "Do you know that there's 600 people in the world with three?" And Dan went home and thought that would be an amazing podcast. And then thus the podcast was born. In actual fact, we've been kind of thinking about podcasts for quite a while.
Yeah,
And and that thing did happen.
yeah.
But we had been thinking about it for quite a long time. And we were just kind of trying to think of a good format. And we just got to a stage. There was a moment in the QI office where we'd finished a series and we didn't have any books that year. And we actually had a bit of free time to kind of do developments and stuff, which doesn't usually happen on QI. And because we're normally so busy. But me and Dan just sat there and sort of kind of tried to come up with lots of ideas. And one of them was the podcast. And we tried lots of different ways of doing it.
Mm,
There's a very popular podcast which I think is coming back called Answer Me This with Helen Zaltzman and Ollie. And they did like questions and answers. So we tried that and it didn't really work because we didn't really feel like we had the authority to do it. And then one of the questions that someone sent us was, "What is the fear of fairgrounds cold?"
yeah.
And so we did some research about it and we found that there was no real answer, but we just started chatting about fairgrounds instead. And when we did that, we played it back and it sounded really good. So we thought, well, why don't we do that? We'll just pick a subject each week and we'll just talk about those. And so we tried that. We did about a dozen practice runs and then we edited together those dozen into an episode and we were going to send it to our bosses, to John and Sarah Lloyd, and say, "What do you think about this?" But they couldn't really use WeTransfer or Dropbox or whatever at the time. So we put it on SoundCloud and gave them the link. And then somehow the link sort of got out there. And we'd said at the top of the show, this is a weekly podcast. And we started getting messages back from people going, "Oh, I can't wait for next week's episode." And we were like, we don't have a next week episode. So we had to quickly rush out a next week's episode. And then every week for the next 11 years, that's what we've been doing.
Wow. And do you reckon that the podcast is popular because of the fact that the facts are so mind-boggling and unbelievable? Or do you reckon that it's popular because of the of you lot?
I think it's a bit of both. I think we have facts that no other place does. I think on Fish we'll do 50 minutes of comedy about an obscure 19th century essayist called William Hazlitt. And I don't think anyone else in the world does that kind of stuff. So I think that is quite unique to us. But overall, I think that with podcasts, people like the people on podcasts. That does seem to be the way that they like the connection that me and Anna and Dan and Andy have together. They like to be part of the club. They feel like, if they met us in the pub, they would know us. We go out on tour all the time and we meet lots of people and they're almost like old friends when they come over to say hi. Do you know what I mean? So I think in podcast world, it does seem because of the intimacy of putting your headphones on, choosing to listen to it, listening to it, and no one else can hear it. It's just you and the people talking. There is something about that medium that makes people really care about the people they're listening to, and so it feels to me like that is the most important part. Although, of course, we're not like Andy and Dan are very good comedians, and me and Anna do our best. Now we're okay now after all this time, but we're not historically comedians, and there are a lot of funnier people out there than us. So I think we do need all the facts to kind of hold the show together. But hopefully people do listen because they like us and they like our connection with each other.
Yeah. And do you reckon that podcasts are so big because of the fact that people can get connections to these people and be connected to it? And do you reckon that, that's the reason why podcasts have lasted for so long and now people are able to sell out big venues, whereas before only one person might turn up?
Um, I think there are myriad reasons why podcasts have become so big. So I think it's probably a bit simplistic to say that's the reason, because even the fact that there was a podcast app on iPhones that you couldn't delete, or even because Serial just turned up and was amazing and just hit a zeitgeist at the right time, and then people were looking for other podcasts. I think that was a massive part of it. So just like one really, really amazing piece of work came out, and that was the only place you could get it. So people had to find out what a podcast was because their mates were talking about it. So I think there's loads of different reasons why podcasts became massive. Um, it's I think also because people do like audio, they like listening to the radio, and um, in the past, you would do it with a wireless or, with your radio in the corner of the room if you're in an office, or if you're in a car, you would turn the radio on in the car. But these days, most people are taking in media on their own. Like if you're watching TikTok or YouTube, you're doing it on your own really most of the time. And I think that is podcasting is kind of that for audio.
Yeah,
So I think it's just, and there's so much more choice than radio as well. Like it used to be, you just had radio one, two, three, four,
yeah.
five, or whatever, and now you have so much choice. So yeah, I think there's loads of different reasons podcasts have become big, and long may it continue for us podcasters.
Yeah, and I think that that helps save the radio format because for a while people you could argue that radio was like on its way out, but I think the podcast has helped. Podcasts and audio dramas, because audio dramas that have improved significantly, have helped save that medium from its demise, and I think that's a positive change because that means that the industry can thrive in other different avenues and it's not just restricted to one thing. And do you reckon that helps having that freedom instead of just being controlled? You can only do certain things. Do you reckon that freedom helps?
Yeah, it definitely does. The truth is that in all media, so whenever you're developing anything, you do need some constraints, because if you're just a show where you just do what you want and there's no rules, you just end up with something unintelligible and whatever. Your show that you're doing is always going to be around an hour, maybe a bit longer if you go on a bit, and you have your format points where you're going to ask me some questions later on, and bits like that. You just need these. It don't have to be much, but there has to be some constriction in order to make any show work. So you do need that. But the fact that it's a podcast that open to anyone, and you can put stuff out there, and if no one listens to it, it doesn't really matter. Like whereas in on the radio, if you get, if Radio 4 decides to give you a small amount of money to make a radio show, and it goes out every Friday and for 4 weeks, that's a big deal, because if you don't nail it in those 4 weeks, then you're not going to get to do any more. And it's such a small amount of time, and it's so constrained that it's really, really important. Whereas in the podcasting world, you can put anything out there. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
If it's good, people listen to it. If it's no good, then keep going, try something else.
yeah. And one of the things you've done based on the success of the podcast is what's the idea behind the Book of the Year series? Because you've done multiple now.
Yeah, we did three. We did 2017, 18, and 19. And the idea was that we Dan Schreiber, who's one of the podcasters, his wife works in publishing, and so he has a good idea of books and how they sell and how they do. And podcast podcasters were being asked to write books at that time in 2017. They still are, but especially around that time. And we'd been approached by quite a few people. And we wanted to make something that wasn't just for our listeners, because we wanted to make something we could see that not necessarily when a podcast was bringing out a book they would sell that many, and we couldn't really understand why, but it seems to be that when you like something in a certain medium, it's very hard to get them to move over to a different medium.
Yeah,
Even if you're a YouTuber and then you do a podcast, it's really hard to get all of your YouTube followers to go to your podcast. If you're a TV person and you go to YouTube, it's really hard to make that leap. And it seemed to be the same with books. That's what we thought at the time anyway. And so we decided to make something that would work for the general market. And we thought by doing a book of the year with fun stories from the year, that's something that really anyone could get involved in. And the other thing was that we just done a BBC Two TV show called No Such Thing as the News, and so we were already in that mindset of sort of looking at news stories and trying to find interesting news things. I think that's the order those two things came in. I think the TV show came first and then the book. But whichever way it was, we were in the mindset of looking for news stories at that time.
yeah. And do you reckon that it helped make it more refreshing when you gain news stories that no one will have heard of? Like you have your main political points in the year, but you have like your really minor stories that you wouldn't even think of. Do you reckon that helped make the book more of a success?
Um, for the success that it was, I mean, I think the first one sold pretty well, and then as with often with series of books, there's slight diminishing returns. But I think for as successful as they were, yeah, there was some of that because we're not that interested on Fish and on QI, I think, of doing what everyone else does. If there's a big news story about Donald Trump becoming president, we don't really want to talk about that. We want to talk about the weird things like his button where he orders Diet Coke or, his bulletproof car and the fact that they have his blood in the car just in case they need it and stuff like that. We're never really interested in the mainstream stuff because we think you can get that somewhere else. Whereas we think the unique thing that we give is the kind of the stuff you would never think of.
Yeah. And I think that that sort of helps because then you have all these like other programs that talk about the news and like last like every so often mentions the odd thing like the boat that cheated at the World Conquer Championships,
Yeah.
which is weird in itself that the Conquer Championships exist. But I think that it helps because it means that you're showing a funnier light on the news because most news is doom and gloom unless it's someone winning like the air guitar championships and then going on every
Yeah.
program possible, such as Britain's Got Talent and then the Chris McCausland show. Two very different programs. But do you reckon that the showing the weirder side is a positiveness so that you can say that the news isn't all doom and gloom and you can help shine a light on the positiveness of it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like no one wants to see all the doom and gloom of what's happening in the world all the time, do they? I mean, that's I think one of the other things with QI more generally that is one of our USPs is the warmth that we bring. And if you when we're deciding who comes on QI each time, and when we have this meeting every year where we go through our list of new people especially and decide if they'll make it. Often one thing that we're looking for is do they have that vibe that QI has, which is you're coming in for a nice, friendly dinner party and you're trying to make your friends laugh and you want to learn a few things and you're not on there like we've mentioned Mock the Week before on here, which is a great show, obviously, and the guys behind that, they have their way of making shows and we have our way, but there was a lot of people have often said that Mock the Week is very combative
Yeah,
and you're as a comedian, all you're trying to do is get your jokes in there as quickly as possible. Whereas I think at QI we're much more, or at least we try to be much more. Um, we try to make everyone have a good time. Everyone who's on the show should be enjoying themselves and should be, feeling very relaxed when they're doing the show. And we often find people who've come off the show and they, we'll chat to them in the green room afterwards and they'll be like, oh, I didn't feel like I said very much because I was just watching the show. I was just sat there enjoying it, and I forgot almost that I was on the show because I was enjoying it so much. You know what I mean?
yeah, and I think that what QI does really well is when you get people on it that you wouldn't expect that would do these things. So I think if we early in the days when you had like uh, Daniel Radcliffe, or I think if I remember it, this is I don't know much about Star Wars because I can't stand it, but I think it's Carrie Fisher, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken, and then Lulu. The three different people you wouldn't expect them to appear in it, and do you reckon that that's what makes QI unique? Because you wouldn't nowhere else would you get Lulu, Daniel Radcliffe, and Carrie Fisher.
Yeah, I can't speak for all of them as in where they came from. I think Dan Radcliffe was a fan of QI actually. And I think if memory serves, yeah, I think this is what happened. He came on the show, and obviously we were all very excited because it was the height of his powers,
Yeah,
Daniel Radcliffe at the time. And he was so excited to be on the show and was such a fan that he insisted that he come and meet all of the QI elves afterwards. And we're like just behind the scenes people, especially back then, who were just like nerdy writers who were just trying to come up with trivia.
yeah,
But he was such a fan that he really wanted to come and meet us all. So we had a little chat with him, and he was so much fun. He was such a good guy, such a nice guy. And I think that is the kind what that's one interesting thing that, for instance, on No Such Thing as a Fish last year, we had Johnny Knoxville from Jackass on
yeah.
the show. And he was just a fan. Like he's a guy who listened to the show and he liked the show so much that said to his agent, "You got to get me on this show." We had Corey Taylor from Slipknot on a few years ago as well. You know, who again, he's just a QI fan. We watched a video of him at Download Festival, and he'd done an interview, and they said, "What do you do in your spare time?" He said, "Well, I just put Dave on and I watch QI. I love that show." And so immediately we just emailed his agent and said, "Yeah, does he really love the show?" And they're like, "Yeah, well, he'll do anything to come on." And so sure enough, he came on. He's been on Fish a few times, I think, and he's kind of a friend of the show now. So yeah, I think because of the way that QI it has become global and has become so ubiquitous, it means we do get a lot of these slightly the fans that you wouldn't necessarily think were fans, and they come on. You know, as soon as we find out that they're up for it, you know, you might not think the lead singer of Slipknot would be perfect on QI, but once you realize that he's a QI fan, you think, well, actually, if he loves the show so much, probably he will be good on it because he loves trivia and he loves that kind of vibe.
Yeah, and you wouldn't expect that Slipknot fans and QI fans would ever merge.
Maybe not, although like I've been to it's not really my scene, as you might have guessed, but I have been to a few like metal concerts, and metal fans, they'll surprise you on how nerdy they are, I think. I think there's a bit of a crossover there.
Yeah, and I think that having all these amazing people on it, I think has helped because like Charles Brandreth, who when he appears on everything, you never know what he's gonna say. It's like a more of a calmed down version of Miriam Margolyes. He wouldn't say anything sweary, but he would say something that you really wouldn't expect, like some incredible connection to some incredible person, and you sit there going, this is just him. You just can be watching him for an hour.
Yeah, Giles is a real tour de force, and I think the good thing about him though is that he's very self-aware, I think. And so he will go crazy and just talk nonstop for 30 minutes, but then he'll realize what's happening. And he's also very generous, I think, to the rest of the panel. He won't just he's doing it because that's him. He's not
Yeah,
doing it because he wants to take over. But we have had case of panelists in the past where we had one panelist who was getting the questions right so much because the point of QI is you're not supposed to get the answers right.
yeah.
Like they're supposed to be so obscure that you don't know the answer. We give you a question, you're not supposed to know the answer. You're supposed to make jokes, and then we'll tell you the answer. That's the whole format, really.
Yeah.
But we had one panelist who was getting all the answers right. It was John Sessions, and he was doing it so much that we had to turn his buzzer off halfway through the show. And he was started slamming the buzzer. He's like, "It's not working. It's not working." And we're like, "Yeah, John, we've turned it off because we just can't have you answering every single question before we even get to the fun part."
Yeah, and one of the other things that you've done that I would say is as good as QI because it's got the in my opinion it's got the same atmosphere in it and it sort of like reminds you of the comedy bit. What's it like producing if I can say it at all, the Museum of Curiosity?
What's it like? Well, it's stressful. Being a producer is very stressful. because you have to do all the work and you don't get any of the plaudits. That's basically that. So it's a tough gig being a producer of any show. But it is a really fun thing to do. And the best part really is the booking part
Yeah,
because the remit is really you have John Lloyd, who's the host, and you have a comedian. So when I was producing, we had Romesh and we had Noel Fielding and Sarah Millican. And they're on every show, and then the other three you're trying to fill up with the most interesting people you can find in the world. And so that part of the job is amazing because you're just trying to find people who are really interesting, really surprisingly funny. Like we had a lizard expert from Australia who was as funny as any comedian I've ever seen. We had a fly expert, Erica McAllister, who's done a few things since, and she is just unbelievably brilliant and charming and amazing. And we had so many people on that show, and that is the really fun part of it. But I think like just going back to what you said in the intro to that question about how how it must be fun to do it and how QI is similar to that. I thought you were going to ask me about Only Connect, which we went on.
yeah,
And what came into my head was the fact that the people who make Only Connect and the people who make QI, and also I think the people who make Taskmaster, which I know that you've interviewed Alex, and I know you're a big fan of that, all the people who make the show love the show.
yeah,
And I think like there's a few things at places in TV where that is the case. And I think it really shows through. Like whenever you get a show where like from the runner to the host and everyone in between, the
yeah,
lighting person, the bookers, everyone loves the show.
yeah,
When you get that, it comes through to the viewer, and these are some of the most successful shows that have ever been made in British television, I think. And I reckon Museum is probably like that. It's a much smaller team. There's probably like 4 or 5 of us, but we're all doing it really for the love of it because no one makes any money.
yeah,
Like you're just doing it because you want to make something really cool.
yeah,
And then it was from making that. I was a producer for a while. Dan Schreiber was a producer before me. And it was from making that we decided to make No Such Thing as a Fish kind of with the same feel, but
yeah,
also with the same constrictions. Like we tried to make it a 30-minute show. It's kind of ballooned since then, but we tried to make it like a Radio 4 show, which no one else was doing that at the time. Like podcasts were just 3 hours of an American guy talking to another American guy with no editing.
yeah.
We decided, no, we're going to make it properly. We're going to edit it properly. We're going to do this as if we wanted to put it on Radio 4. And that I think that was what made a difference with us at the very start, is that we were very professional.
Yeah, and I think that it having people on working on the show that love it helps making. And you briefly mentioned Taskmaster there, and one of the things that really interested me is that because of how popular QI was, it's interesting when you then delve into it further. So when I interviewed the Swedish Taskmaster, Bam Larsen, we had a brief conversation about the Swedish version of QI,
Mm,
which wasn't as popular, but I think that it shows how successful QI is enough for to have a Swedish version, because Swedish TV, once you've made a hit format in Sweden, you're done. You've got a program very successful, and you'll probably have a fight over who wants to take it over from you. Uh,
yeah.
but I think that it helps with the longevity, and because it shows that the people that made it enough, the company that hold the international rights loved it so much they thought, oh, this would work really well in Sweden. And do you reckon that it being produced in other countries helps to show that QI is a good format?
Um, well, Intresseklubben did okay in Sweden, but I think they only maybe did 2 or 3 seasons. And I think we might have done one in France that lasted 1 year and one maybe in Belgium or Netherlands that lasted 1 year. And we've tried to make it in America a few times and it's never worked out. So I don't know that that is evidence that it's a good format. I do think it is a good format, but I'm not sure that our international endeavors are evidence of
Yeah,
that. And I think it's quite a British thing. I think it would work well in New Zealand
yeah, it would.
because the New Zealand comedy sensitivities are pretty much the same as Britain. Um, and I think it did work okay in Sweden. Obviously, I've watched clips of it, but I didn't understand any of it, so I couldn't really tell. There's a Belgian version, which is not associated with us, but made by a friend of ours, called what's it called? Leaving Skyra versus the World or something like that. Which does very, very well. And it's like quite similar to QI, but with enough differences
Yeah,
that we're not gonna try and sue him because he's a friend. But yeah, it's kind of similar and that does really well. So yeah, it's weird. I think like the other thing is that there is this feeling of enjoying facts and enjoying knowledge for the sake of it,
yeah,
and associating it with comedy or entertainment. And I think that is worldwide. And I think you see that in every country in the world. And if QI's never worked in America yet, then that's fine. But if you look at the Ig Nobel Prizes that they have there, like Mark Abrahams, who does those, which is like for weird, wacky science,
yeah,
is very similar to what we do. I whenever he comes in the UK, I always hang out with him because, we really work in the same direction.
yeah,
And you can see that in almost every country you go to. Every country has the Bulgarian Stephen Fry or the, Madagascan Stephen Fry or whatever, like they do exist everywhere.
yeah,
QI has never quite smashed it on the international stage. But then on the other hand, Fish has, I would say. No Such Thing as a Fish definitely is, a worldwide thing. We've played gigs all over Europe, Australia, New Zealand, America, yeah, all over the place. So the appetite is there. It's just TV's difficult. Like it's just there's so many things when you make QI in Sweden, you would think it's just a case of someone in Sweden saying, "Can we make QI?" and us saying yes, and then they make it, and that's it. But there's so much more to it than that. Like we can't really go into it now, but we had to put like a whole Bible together of how to make it, and um, I know Alex does that with Taskmaster as well, and like also we gave them loads of material of like this is all of our questions from the first 10 years you might want to reuse. Like it's just so much work that goes into these things, and it doesn't take much for them to be a success or not be a success.
yeah. And I think that's evidence. And as you mentioned, Alex is involved. There is a couple of one photo that is brilliant. Is I don't know how much English the international people that produce the versions of Taskmaster know, but there's a photo of Alex on a Zoom call on one of those giant whiteboards, those digital whiteboards,
Yeah.
whilst the Portuguese Taskmaster and Taskmaster assistant are stood in an office together. There's other people on the Zoom call, you just can't make out who they are. But he's Alex on the big screen, he's like blown up. So that they're all stood in the same meeting room together talking.
Wow.
Alex appeared on the Portuguese version. Someone had asked him to take a sock off. So he was at some sort of fancy do, and you watch him take his sock off. And everyone's I didn't understand what was going on, but all Alex was doing was taking his sock off, and then that was it. And then they just went, "Oh, it's Alex on," and then they
I
just moved
don't
on.
know. I don't know. You might know how well Taskmaster's done in all these different countries. I know, obviously, the New Zealand one is just insanely good, and the Aussie one's quite good as well. And I believe one of the Scandi ones is supposed to be awesome. But how well's it done on the other, like in Portugal? Can
Well,
they?
it's done really well in certain Portugal. They're on like the fourth or fifth series. They're
Okay.
really well because they've got a word they can call it Taskmaster Portugal because Taskmaster is a word that doesn't mean anything else, and in Sweden it means something else. So they called it
Ah.
Best Test, and that's done really well because that's moved to another channel. So that went from no adverts.
Mm.
Uh, so they had to fill a gap to having adverts, but that took a massive because David Sundin's released two books out of it. They've released a board game out of it. In Finland, they're doing Junior Taskmaster in Finland, so they're doing a Finnish version of Junior Taskmaster that recently had in the UK. So it's really popular, and it's like there's only a few countries where it hasn't worked. In Germany, it didn't work. In America, in Belgium, and in Croatia, they never cancelled it, but it just never aired again. And so in a few countries it hasn't worked, but in every other country it's become a massive hit. So in
Huh.
Denmark they've got Losers of Losers, uh, Second Chance, Champions of Champions. They've got board games. They've got all sorts. And so the franchise itself, once the UK version ends, will still float and live on its own because it's so popular in Quebec. It's really popular in Quebec, which is an odd thing to say,
Mm.
but it's really, really well received above the guards. And even Alex, there's a website called Taskmaster.info created by a fan that generates every episode, every task, every similarity to every task, every point. And if there's a certain element of a task that's been used, it details which version they've also used the task. Alex now uses that website to do research to make sure that that task he's come up with has been used in another country.
That's fantastic. It is amazing the kind of the way that everything's connected these days and the fact that you can get these quite obsessive people, but who can be really useful to you. We the QI I think now has transcripts for all our episodes probably, because it's quite easy to do these days. But in the early days, there was just one young lady from America who just did it all herself and posted it online. And then suddenly we found how useful it was to have transcripts of all the shows. Now we have people who do it, and like it's we have a big old database with all this stuff in, but in those days we didn't. And on No Such Thing as a Fish, the opposite way, maybe not quite so useful. We had someone who wrote to us, which they worked out the earliest that we'd said the word in every episode, and then put a big graph about who said it first and who said it last and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that's ever become very useful, but
Yeah,
it's amazing these people who are super fans can help you out as well.
because there's a team of people called, I think it's called Taskmaster World or Taskmaster International, um, and what they do is they translate every episode of the UK version to all the languages that they've got teams for, and then they do every all the international version. They've got a team of people that will do it. They've got a team of people translating, and they've got people team watching them to proofread the translations to make sure that they're accurate. But like one of the translations might say the name of a comedian or a personality in that country, but in the brackets will say what they're famous for.
Yeah, yeah, got
You're
it.
watching it, and they might make a cultural reference you might not understand, but these fan subtitles in brackets very quickly explain why is that bit funny? Why is it what's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I think that you're right, the fans do a lot of things. So there's I don't know how up to date, but there's a website of calculating how many times Paul Hollywood has given a Hollywood handshake. And so it's like it's one of those websites which ticks over. So when you go on to it, it might be a new number every series or every week. It'll be a new number of how many times he's given the Hollywood handshake and what the ratio between the handshakes to whatever. And I just think that fans just do things because they think it's clever, but it's also really funny for everyone else because they laugh at it later on.
Yeah, yeah. Bake Off's another one that's done really well around the world. It's, I mean, if you could probably need Richard Osman on here to tell you exactly why things work and why other things don't work. But I met the I met someone from the Danish Bake Off, and I was asking them about all that because they, in order to do the Danish one, they'd watched every single episode from everyone from all around the world because they thought that this would give them some insight of how to win. And I think they came sixth in the end or something, so it didn't really help. But they reckon that the French version of Bake Off is just so insanely good. Like because obviously everyone in France is a patissier or a boulanger or whatever,
Yeah.
and they reckon like if you look at the best versions of the British one compared to the worst versions of the French one, it's just an insane difference. Don't know if that's true.
And in the last series of Bake Off, before we move on, there was I think they had to a hanging
Oh
cake,
yeah.
hanging, but Scott Bryan, the TV critic, had found, and I can't remember which country now, found another country that had done the same thing, but this one woman had got it hanging, and they were about to judge it, and then the whole thing just collapsed and fall
Oh
to the
no.
floor, and you watch it all just crumble away, and she's managed to make it all the way to the podium to get it judged. And then it went, no, thank you. And it went,
Wow.
and you'd just be devastated if that happened.
That's true. Although in the grand scheme of the world, it's not that important. And I think that's the great thing about Bake Off is it really does make you care about something that is really very, very trivial.
Yeah, and one of the other things as we move away from Bake Off, but saying the similar realm, one of the other things you've recently done that people say if you go for a run, it'll still be on when you get back, or if you go out for a meal when you get back, it'll still be on. What was it like appearing on an epi on a recent episode of the longest running program on daytime TV on a Sunday brunch?
Oh, Sunday brunch. Yeah, that's the fifth time we've done Sunday brunch, actually. So I've done it quite often. They always wheel us out at Christmas and put silly elf hats on us. But what I would say about that is, first of all, that the team are amazing. Like the Sunday brunch team are just so good. And also, I mean, Tim and Simon are very, very good interviewers as well. They've been doing it for lots of years, and they're really, really fantastic interviewers. But the team, the backstage team, I'm always incredibly impressed by how good they are because they have to make this show live,
Yeah,
or the one we did actually was pre-recorded because it was Christmas, but they still do it as live.
yeah,
So it's like, how long is it? Like 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it is.
maybe
Uh,
3 hours.
3 hours, and the whole team are working there non-stop, and they're all so up and they're so happy, and everyone knows what they're doing. And there's never ever, when I've done it, there's never been any errors or anything. It's a really, really incredible thing that they do. Um, as for me personally, the last one that we did, I don't think I was very good at it. I think it's quite a difficult gig for us because you're you're kind of sat behind a table the whole time, and it's a table where, I had Maisie on one side, Maisie Adam on one side of me, and Anna Tashinsky, who's one of the other QI elves, on the other side of me, and you can kind of talk to them. It's like at a dinner party, but anyone who's two seats away from
Yeah,
you, you can't really kind of converse with them. And
yeah,
you never really know when's a good time to sort of interject and when's a good time to not interject. And also, for us, like, because we kind of straddle the world of, we're not really comedians, but we're not really experts on anything. It's a really difficult gig because you don't really know what your job is. Are you supposed to make jokes? In
yeah.
which case, you've got Maisie there, and we also had Miles Jupp there, who are both unbelievably funny people. So presumably, we're not there to do that. But then we're not really experts on anything either. We just know loads of facts. So you're kind of hoping that they just ask you to give you a fact about Prosecco or a fact about Christmas cake or something.
Yeah.
So it was a tough gig, that actually, this last one that we did. But having said that, I really enjoyed it because I just love their team. And I just, like, I would do it at a drop of a hat if they asked me to do it again, because it's always such an enjoyable thing to do. And also you drink champagne at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, and I think the only issue with Sunday brunch is that when they're doing something and then you have your opportunity to like pan on the table, and it's really awkward when they're just about to eat something because some people might be self-conscious the way they eat. To
Yeah.
watch them and then the camera just pans on them as they're trying to eat, and that must just be the most horrifying moment because you don't know when the camera's going to be on you, so you have to try and eat really, really nicely and really really easily all the time. That just must be a nightmare.
I think that's true, probably. I haven't watched it back because I was out of the country, and I wouldn't watch it anyway because I don't watch things that I'm on. But um, I've never noticed having, because I do watch it when other people are on it. I've never noticed people doing the kind of um, Ed Miliband bacon sandwich thing halfway through the show. But the one thing I did notice is that the cameras do pan to you. You're always on set the whole
Yeah,
way through. So
yeah,
it's a 3.5, 3 hour show, whatever it is, but you're always there. And so even when they're interviewing Miles or Maisie or Yolanda or
yeah,
whoever else was on, the guy from In Between Us and his partner, whoever they were interviewing, like they would always pan over to you whenever they made a joke, and you have to kind of be laughing along. You have to be, and it's quite hard to hear what's being said in the other corner of the room as well. So, you know, the in-betweeners guy will make some really funny comment, and then the camera will pan to you, and you're supposed to be laughing at it, but you haven't really heard what they said. And so you just basically have to have this rictus smile on your face the whole time, just in case
yeah,
that happens.
yeah.
But no, like I say, I haven't watched it back, and I don't think I was very good in it this year. But I think it's such a brilliant show, and I'm not surprised it's gone on for so long because there's, yeah, I I know I've said it 10 times, but I can't say it enough about how good their team is. They're
yeah,
they're so impressive. And you know, the other people as well. The One Show, we've done the One Show a
yeah,
couple of times. Their team are just insanely good. Oh my
yeah,
goodness. Like, because we make a show which we make and then it goes out a year later, and we
yeah,
have all the editing tricks that you need in the world.
yeah,
And we can retake and we can do whatever we want. We don't usually retake on QI, but we can. Like our job is so much easier than what those guys do. Those
yeah.
live TV guys, I'm in the complete awe of them all the time.
Yeah, and when you're on when the interview's happening and Tim or Sam will say, and here's a clip of whatever. When you're at the table, do you see? Is there a
No.
monitor near you watching that clip?
No, we don't see that clip. And we will be aware of what it was because there's been a big email exchange for a couple of weeks before where they're asking for assets or
Yeah,
assets. They're asking for videos and audio and stuff like that. But we don't know what they're playing. No, not at all. So I don't know if that came across when we've been interviewed. I don't know. I don't know what they showed actually. I think they will have showed clips from QI, I
yeah,
assume.
yeah, they did. And one of the other things that's really funny is that when you because the one show and it's live and 1 minute you can talk about famine, the next minute you talk about hot dogs. I think one of the greatest clips of the one show, and I think if I remember, I can't remember his name, but it was an American blog. He'll come to me at some point. He'd never been on the show before, and it was Matt Baker and then Alex Jones, and they both couldn't stop laughing because he had thought it was really weird that they'd gone from talking about whoever's program and then talking about the devastation in like wherever, and he kept on butting in, going, "This is mad. This is weird," and they laugh, and then someone else says, "Wait, they'll come back to you in a minute. They just need to talk about famine."
Yeah, we actually we did a um we did an interview for BBC Breakfast
Yeah,
to try and sell one of our books. And it's just a silly old QI book.
yeah,
But it happened on the day of some terrible thing that happened somewhere in the world. I don't even remember what it was. And so they spent like 2 hours talking about this awful thing that had happened. And then they went, and now finally, here's James and Anna to talk about their new book. And obviously, I mean, like, what do you do in that situation? You do your best, but God,
yeah.
yeah, it's tough. But I mean, they're all amazing shows.
Yeah, and there's a really successful podcast based on the one called the One Show Show, where
Yeah.
where they have like really serious journalists on it, take the mickey of like how absurd it is. And one of the things you've done that is I think is fascinating because of the reason that it exists, because you wouldn't normally expect this type of thing to be on a grand scale. It is, but what was the idea behind no such thing as a fish behind the gills?
Oh, yeah. Well, good question. I'm not sure where the idea came from to do that. So we did that behind the scenes, like mini documentary thing about fish. I think we were going on tour and we liked the idea of filming it and keeping it for posterity because who knows when all this is going to end. Like people who don't know fish, they might not know that this little podcast, we're going around the world. We're playing the Sydney Opera House. We're like, we played Hammersmith Apollo. This is like a very weird, very big sort of social phenomenon that's happening. And we thought that it would be useful to sort of video it so that we can show our kids, no, no, this really did happen.
Yeah,
And it kind of came about as well because QI was starting to make more TV things. And so this was a good excuse to sort of people to get a bit of experience of editing and all that kind of stuff. So really, that was it. I suppose we just started making these shows. I think there were possibly four of them, maybe five, and we thought we'll just put them um, on the internet and people can buy them if they want. And we did, and they were for a week. We were the most popular download on Apple TV, I think. And now, of course, like Apple TV now
yeah,
is this incredible is Ted Lasso's on Apple TV, isn't it? And all this stuff. Like that is a proper streaming service. But back then it was basically if you had an Apple product, you
yeah.
could download video onto your phone. That was all it was. But for 1 week, we were the biggest thing on Apple TV. And so, that will forever be true,
Yeah. And
even if it's caveated.
Yeah, and I think it is a brilliant series. I've seen it. I think I've seen it 3 times, 4 times. Because it's one of those things is that, well, in my case, I don't just sit there and watch TV. I have to watch TV and then I get inspired. That's my issue. Is that I can't watch TV without then thinking, oh, I'll do something similar to that, and then I have the nightmare of trying to do something similar to that. So I just think that it's one of those things that it's not just good entertainment and it's not just interesting behind the scenes, but I also think it's really inspirational because you learn from it because you learn how you all go about researching these things
Mm.
and it becomes fascinating. Do you reckon do you reckon that comes across in your opinion? Do you reckon you get that feeling that people are gonna be inspired by this and people are gonna learn from this?
I think just more generally, I think like forgetting about behind the gills for the moment, I think just generally with what we do, you do hope that you inspire people to kind of be more interested in the world and stuff. And I think when we meet people on tour or whatever, and in fact, the people who work on QI now are people who were watching QI when they were teenagers. Do you know what
Yeah,
I mean? So I think there is a lot of kids, a lot of like 12 to 16-year-old kids who start to get into QI and it kind of informs what they will be into when they get older. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of nerdy kids out there who will listen to our show or watch our shows and think, yeah, I want to do that. I want to learn stuff. I want to be interested in stuff and all that. And I think in a world where everything seems to be shrinking a little bit, if you kind of go onto Google and you Google something, I don't know what we're doing now on W series, we're doing the Wild West. If you Google Wild West and look for interesting facts, it's really hard these days because Google has gone rubbish and you get the same top 10 results for everything. And it takes a lot of hard work to find stuff that isn't the top level of life. And I think that kind of curiosity, which is really what drives humans and like curiosity is so important for humans and for life and it's what got us out of the trees and out of the caves and stuff like that. It's really what makes people human. I think it is really important that that still is out there in a world where everyone's just doing the next thing, going to work, coming home, going to work, coming home. You do need to be interested about the world. I hope that we inspire that. Obviously, it's beyond our remit, and also like it's a bit up yourself to say I hope we're inspiring the world, but like I hope we do a little bit, and I think from the evidence of the people we meet, we do.
yeah, and I think that because of me, because of QI and because I have fond memories spending one whole summer watching QI because when it was on Netflix, QIXL, you could just spend, or I did, I spent a whole summer watching it on repeat for the whole 6 weeks. Um, which definitely shows that I don't have a social life, which handy. It's handy in life. And so all this, and then when I discovered the podcast and all this, and so that inspired me to rebrand because I no longer play video games. I haven't played a video game in 3 or 4 years, so I rebranded my gaming channel to be Tom's Fact of the Day because I did it on my college radio station as a whim because no one else was doing anything, so I could do whatever I wanted. So I got the bloke that ran the station to make me a mini jingle, which he'd never done before. So it was a new thing. So now I use it on YouTube. I think I'm on like Fact 63, a lot of it was based because of all of this, and then because then when you look online, you look on the QI social, and they've got all these different facts that come on a day, and I utilize some of them in the future because of learning and finding facts of my own. I'm going to utilize some other my own facts that I found. One of the things you've done recently that I think is quite fascinating, or as I like to call it, quite interesting. Where did the idea of the new podcast quite a good sport come about?
Yeah, so that came from a book that we wrote, actually. So we wrote a book called Everything to Play For, the QI Book of Sports. It has since been renamed A Load of Old Balls for paperback. And that was myself and Anna Toshinsky. We're both sports fans, and we thought that QI doesn't really cover sports that much. We do a bit, but not really as much as we should, considering what an interesting world it is. And so we thought we'd write a book about it. And then as part of the as part of the contract for the book, they said you need to do a podcast. So we thought, well, how can we make this as interesting as possible? And there was an Olympic year coming up.
Mm.
And so what we decided to do is we would speak to as many Olympians as we
Yeah,
could. And we interviewed them. And then at the end of each episode, we tried the sport ourselves. And so we did some rowing on the River Thames. We did some sport climbing. We did some archery, all sorts of stuff like that. And really, the whole point of it was to try and make it as fun as possible because it was a thing that we kind of priced ourselves in. We knew we had to do it. So the question is, do you do something that's just for the sake of it because you have to,
mm,
or do you try and make this as fun and interesting and
yeah.
as good as possible? And we decided to go down the latter route and really sort of we had an absolute ball doing it. It was so much fun and so interesting to meet these sports people who every single one of them has an incredible story.
And do you reckon that if you ever did it again in the future, it would work really well as a TV series? Because I think that the idea of trying out new sports would from an aspect of an area where you're not getting an elite athlete trying the new sport, but it's two people that will never have done the sport. Do you reckon that would be something that might happen in the next year, 4
I
years?
don't think that will happen with us. I mean, if anyone wants to give us money, then great. We would love to do it. But we haven't had anyone knocking down our doors asking us to make it. And actually, I think Rob and Ramesh do something quite similar.
Yeah,
Theirs obviously is much less facty than ours, and ours has their interviews with the sports people aspects that they don't have. But they do. I watched the darts one over Christmas where they played darts at Ali Pali and stuff, and it's very funny. And those two are
yeah,
obviously geniuses. Ours is very different vibe to theirs. But I think what we might do with that going forward is to take it away from sports, maybe.
yeah,
Like what we found with the book is that it's done fine, it's done pretty well and sold enough copies that, our
yeah,
publishers are relatively happy and it got nominated for an award. But we feel that our fans, the QI fans and the fish fans, a lot of them are turned off by sports.
yeah,
And no matter how often we say to them, no, no, guys, honestly, everything's interesting, including sport. And if you give it a chance, you will find out that this is really interesting. And
yeah,
when we talk about the history of rowing, it's one interesting fact from another after another after another. And it doesn't matter that it's about rowing and not about Tolstoy, it's
yeah,
still what we do. We feel that just because it's the word sports, people are just turned off by it. So we think one idea would be to do the same thing, but to do it in different subjects.
yeah,
So, like for instance, we did a bit on the show on the podcast a while ago on No Such Thing as a Fish, I should say, about how to deliver a cow. And someone, as quite often happens, someone wrote to us saying, "Oh, I deliver cows for a living. Would you like to come and try?" And so that's the kind of thing
yeah,
we could go into, like slightly more, I suppose, more like generational game. You're much too young to remember that, but like the generation game, which you would try things at the end of the show, and they would get people to make sausages or throw pots or whatever. That kind of thing could be a good way of going about it. But we're currently literally after this meeting going to have a chat about what we do with that next because
yeah.
we really enjoyed making it,
Yeah.
but we think it needs something slightly different.
Because I think that the idea of trying new things and doing it in a factor way, so that you're not just watching or listening to two people going, oh, let's try this, but you know a bit about it and you've done some research and then you can use that into practice. I think that would work. So I think that like elements like having a trying to win the Tic Tac World Championships or playing a game of Pokemon or whatever's popular. And then I think that would work as a concept because you can have all these facts, but then you can actually try them out. So like top trumps, you can be trying to work out to win a game of top trumps in the first half, and back in the episode, you try and use those skills to try and see if you would win because you would know the stats because you've done all.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for instance, we did a table tennis episode of the sports podcast, and I interviewed a table tennis referee, and Anna interviewed a table tennis player, one of the Britain's best player. And when we played against each other, she'd got lots of tips on how to play by him, and I got lots of tips on the rules by my guy. So I could say, no, no, I'm claiming that point because you slightly, you threw the ball up the wrong way or whatever.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's all about sort of utilizing what we've learned.
yeah. And so, as we come towards the end of this quite interesting interview, that joke will die of its own death eventually. Once I stop saying it, he'll probably die a death because then someone else will come up with a more of a unique way of saying it, more interesting way of saying it, shall we say? So this is the point in the interview where you can share um, anything that you're working on currently that you're excited for people to either see or hear.
Interesting. Well, to be honest, it's mostly what we have always been working on. So the V series of QI is currently airing. I don't know when this will go out, but it's there or thereabouts at the moment, coming towards an end. The W series we are writing. I have received all of the first drafts of scripts from all the elves, and I've script edited them, and they have gone to Sandy. So they're currently on Sandy's desk, and we'll be recording that in February and March. And if you go on to Google and you search for QI tickets, you might be able to come to a show. The tickets are free, and you have to queue up sometimes in the rain, but it's always an amazing show to come to. No Such Thing as a Fish is going to continue into the forever, into the extra mundane of beyond the end of the universe. We will keep doing that every single week as long as people keep listening because we love it so much. We'll be doing some live shows later in the year. We did a big old tour in 2024. In 2025, I think we'll just do the occasional show, maybe at a few festivals or we've had some offers from various different places where we might go and do some shows. So look out for that. And yeah, apart from that, follow us on social media and you'll find out anything more that we're doing.
Yeah. And you personally, where can people track you down? Don't give away your home address, but where can people track you down?
Yes, so I am on Twitter a lot less these days, but I'm on at James Harkin there. My Instagram is no such thing as James Harkin. I'm also on TikTok at no such thing as James Harkin, but I've not ticked any talks yet. But I kind of feel like I've got loads of extra material, so maybe I'll do something like that in the new year. Um, I can't remember how you got in touch with me. Was it on LinkedIn?
Yeah, it was.
So if anyone wants to, I've a few people have messaged me on LinkedIn. I don't really use it, but because I so rarely use it, if people message me on there, I always see the messages. So yeah, people could just find me on LinkedIn if you want. I don't know, I'm everywhere. Just search James Harkin. There's only two of us. And if it's the one who isn't writing about the war in Syria, then it's me.
And so there we have it, another one in a good place to end. Thank you guys for watching, and remember, no, I forgot.